You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's always a sad thing when we have to talk about the realities of CTE because some of these fighters, they go into the octagon literally putting their lives on the line, knowing 100% well that after their professional career, they have to probably deal with the real side effects of CTE. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to talk about Nate Diaz because Nate Diaz is honestly probably going through that right now because he had some of the craziest things to say recently about coming back to the UFC. He said, I want to go back and get a UFC title. That's something only somebody with CTE would say. I don't want to fight for nothing. You know what? I want to fight for something. Okay, look, I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't think that Nate Diaz is all the way there mentally. I mean, this guy, he talks with a crazy speech impediment. Obviously, this guy has taken an insane amount of damage throughout his entire freaking career. But to say that he wants to come back into the UFC and fight for a title is absolutely freaking insane. I mean, look, this guy, this very smart guy here, had a comment to say about this. He said, this guy got his ass whooped by Logan Paul. I don't want to see this dude get mauled in the UFC. Very smart take. Insanely high IQ take here, ladies and gentlemen. Nate Diaz should not be anywhere near a UFC contract. I would hate to see Nate Diaz come back and take unnecessary damage because 100% he would get his ass whooped in the UFC. I mean, everybody likes to glaze Nate Diaz like he was, this great, amazing fighter back then. Granted, he was, and he had a lot of tough fights, but that's not the version of Nate Diaz that we are honestly seeing today. Obviously, Nate Diaz is like, what, 40 something, if not close to 40. There is no way in hell that Nate Diaz comes back to the UFC and fights for a title. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to be competitive at all whatsoever. Would definitely get freaking 3-0'd. He would get dominated like 20, 25, 27 type shit. Literally. I'm not even kidding. Let's go ahead and react to what Nate Diaz had to say. And this is me not hating. This is just me being 100% realistic. Everybody needs to be realistic about this. Nate Diaz would come back to the UFC and not find too much success.
And what do you have to finish? Because it sounds like you're like, well, I'm not done. So like, what would make it finish for you? What would you want to finish for your legacy?
Well, everybody's boring right now, so I'm trying to do other shit for the
Facts.
moment, but I want to go back and get a UFC title.
Okay.
I don't want to fight for nothing, I want to fight for something. So.
Okay. So is that in the works right now?
Yeah, well, right now there's nobody that's at an like, I don't really, who's the champion right now? 170.
Who is champion right now?
See? Exactly. That's what I'm.
This is just insane, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and point some things out. This is insane. Nate Diaz looks like he's in really bad shape. This dude just has like one of the craziest humps on his back that I've ever seen from a professional fighter. You would think that a guy that works out all the time would probably have like proper posture. His freaking guts hanging out of his body. This dude is literally smoking weed. God knows how much pounds of weed, how many ounces of weed this guy goes through a freaking week. You know what I'm saying? But honestly, as a professional fighter, especially as a professional cage fighter, you probably shouldn't be doing that or limiting that as much as possible. Not saying that, professional fighters can't smoke weed, but there definitely should be a limit. And that's coming from someone that used to smoke a lot. Anyways, Nate Diaz right here, there's even some points in this interview where he has like these crazy speech like sequences. Like, let's go ahead and listen to this one.
I don't want to fight for nothing, I want to fight for something. So.
Okay. So is that in the works right now?
Yeah, well, right now there's nobody that's at an like, I don't really, who's the champion right now?
What the fuck was that? Like, do you guys hear this shit? Like, Nate Diaz is just like blabbering. Sometimes you can't even understand what this guy's saying. Like, this guy has taken so much freaking damage. Like, he has one of the craziest speech impediments I've ever heard from a professional fighter. Granted, there is some worse out there, but I think that this is a clear indication that Nate Diaz is going through something. It can only be CTE. It can only be CTE for Nate Diaz to think that he could come back and just automatically get a freaking title in the UFC right now. At what? How old is freaking Nate Diaz? 39 freaking years old. 39 years old. Let's go ahead and look at his resume. He is won only 2 fights in his last 5 fights. One of them was Anthony Pettis like years ago, and then he got a last win against Tony Ferguson 3 years ago. And I mean, yeah, it's Tony Ferguson. But anyways, it's Tony Ferguson. I just don't think Nate Diaz would be all that successful coming back to the UFC. This guy's freaking just talking crazy. What I would love to see Nate Diaz do, honestly, is just do some of these grappling events. I think if Nate Diaz does some of these grappling events that they have like on the UFC app or the ESPN app, I think that they would be like really, really interesting fights, and it would bring a lot more awareness to those areas of the sport that desperately need more coverage. And I think that Nate Diaz being a big freaking name would do justice to that. But coming back to the UFC and expecting a title shot is no, it's not gonna happen. That's just crazy talk. If I'm just being completely honest, um, no way in hell that happens. And I don't even think that Nate Diaz even comes back to the UFC against anybody in the top 10 and just wins. I just don't think so. I think the game has evolved so much to the point where the game has left Nate Diaz behind, both from like a fighter development standpoint as well as, father time is a real thing and Nate Diaz is nowhere near close being, to his physical prime. He would get absolutely rolled. I mean, let's just go ahead and look at the welterweight rankings right now because if there's anybody here that I name, you guys think that Nate Diaz could actually beat, let me know down in the comment section below. There is one name here, and I'm gonna mention him very, very quickly. But let's go ahead and talk about Michael Venom Page. Obviously, knocks out Nate Diaz within the first round. Vicente Luque beats Nate Diaz within 3 rounds. Carlos Parates knocks out Nate Diaz within 10 seconds. Michael Morales beats Nate Diaz. Steven Wonderboy Thompson goes to the freaking end with Nate Diaz, but wins every single round. Jeff Neal, of course, we all know he's like that troll at the bridge that you need to beat in order to get to the other side. Gatekeeper type fighter, beats Nate Diaz. Kobe Covington is the name that I would probably give to Nate Diaz if he was to come back to potentially have like a one-off fight in the welterweight division and probably just get a title fight just strictly off purely on making money, not even because Nate Diaz would actually deserve it. Like if the UFC just wants to make like a quick freaking $100 billion, it would be against Kobe Covington, beats him and then fights for a title, easy title defense for whoever's champion at the time. With the way that Kobe Covington has been fighting the last couple of performances, there have been real stinkers. Nate Diaz would honestly have a real opportunity, but even then, Kobe Covington probably wins. Gilbert Burns definitely beats the shit out of Nate Diaz. Ian Machado Gary, I mean, whoops his ass. Joaquin Buckley would literally give, he would shorten the lifespan of Nate Diaz. I'm not even kidding. Joaquin Buckley would like take 10 years off of Nate Diaz's life, and nobody wants to see that. Sean Brady would cuddle fuck Nate Diaz on the fence, and he would never advance the position and probably just land strikes from the clinch. And that would probably be the only way that he would win the fight. Jack Della Maddalena beats the shit out of Nate Diaz. Kamaru Usman, his cartilage would probably make him walk with a limp against Nate Diaz. His knees would probably make him buckle, but even then, I still think he would knock out Nate Diaz. Shavkat Rakhmonov, obviously, Lil Bros Nate Diaz, he would smother him. He would absolutely destroy him. He would give him like a wet willy probably in the octagon. Shavkat Rakhmonov probably beats Nate Diaz with one arm behind his back, with a limp, hopping on one leg, without a doubt. Leon Edwards, I mean, he got wobbled by Nate Diaz, but beat Nate Diaz before. So probably Leon Edwards wins that matchup. And against Bilal Muhammad, I mean, Bilal Muhammad is just going to back up Nate Diaz to the fence and just freaking obliterate him. Nate Diaz would have no chance whatsoever against anybody here except Kobe Covington, in my honest opinion. But besides that, I just don't think that Nate Diaz should come back to the UFC. I think that he should remain retired. I think that he should definitely do some of these grappling events, and they should pay out Nate Diaz 100%. I still think that he's one of the greatest, characters the UFC has ever seen. But to say that he needs to come back to the UFC and get a title shot is absolutely freaking crack talk. This guy's had too many high sessions to the point that there's probably people around him that are telling him that that would be an amazing idea, and no, it wouldn't. I'm here to tell you, Nate Diaz, that that's an absolute terrible idea. Stay where you are. Do these boxing events, get paid by millions and millions of dollars to fight non-real combat sports athletes. Like he got his ass whooped by Logan Paul, a WWE fucking cartoon, and got his ass whooped, which was absolutely terrible for the UFC. It was bad. It was a bad look for MMA fighters, a bad look for real combat sports athletes. And yeah, he should just not come back to the UFC at all after that. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. As always, it's a pleasure. Peace out and have a good one.